The 6th of March, 1943, well before dawn, on a low ridge of scrubland outside the Tunisian town of Medenine, a cold gray fog sits in the wadis. 6 men crouch around a small gun, its barrel no thicker than a drainpipe, hidden under netting and torn thorn bush. Sergeant Andrews cannot see the enemy yet. He can hear them. Somewhere out in the mist, down the Tunisia road, engines are turning over. Not one or two, dozens. The deep, grinding note of tank tracks on stone, growing louder in the dark. His gun is a British 6-pounder, a towed anti-tank gun so modest that a jeep can pull it. By the standards of March 1943, the British Army already considers it half obsolete. A bigger gun, the 17-pounder, is arriving to replace it. Crews have already learned the hard truth in Tunisia. This little gun cannot punch through the front of the newest German tank, and rolling towards Andrews in that fog are 3 panzer divisions, more than 160 tanks, commanded in person by the most famous soldier of the war, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. By the end of this day, 52 of those tanks will be wrecked. Rommel will call off the attack. Within 72 hours, he will leave Africa forever and never return. He will never win another battle. This is the story of how a gun the army was already trying to retire broke the back of Rommel's last offensive, and how it was done not by a wonder weapon, but by frightened men holding their fire until the tanks were close enough to touch. To understand why that morning mattered, you have to go back 4 months to a disaster in the sand. In late October 1942 at El Alamein in Egypt, Rommel's army was broken in a battle of attrition. What followed was one of the longest fighting retreats in military history. Rommel pulled his forces back across the whole width of Libya. Tripoli fell to the British 8th Army on the 23rd of January, 1943. By the middle of February, the last Axis troops had left Libya entirely. They fell back into Tunisia, onto an old French defensive position called the Mareth Line. But now Rommel faced a nightmare. Behind him, from the west, a second Allied force had landed. British and American troops had come ashore in Operation Torch back in November. Rommel was trapped between 2 armies, Montgomery's veterans pressing from the east, the Green Allied forces closing from the west. On the 23rd of February, Rommel was given command of the newly formed Army Group Africa. On paper, it was a promotion. In truth, it was command of a trap. He was ill. He was exhausted. He was quarreling with his Italian and German superiors, and he knew that Montgomery was about to smash into the Mareth Line. So Rommel decided to hit first. His plan was a spoiling attack. Strike the 8th Army before it was ready. Disrupt its buildup. Buy time. The operation was codenamed Capri. He would throw 3 of his best armored divisions at the British near Medenine, the 10th Panzer Division, the 15th Panzer Division, the 21st Panzer Division. It was exactly the kind of fast, aggressive armored punch that had made his name. 2 years earlier, it might have worked, but Rommel no longer held the one advantage that had won him his greatest victories: surprise, because the British already knew he was coming. A quick word before we get to the guns. If you are finding this one worth your time, a subscribe honestly helps the channel keep going. Right, back to that foggy ridge. Let us talk about the weapon at the center of this story. The Ordnance quick-firing 6-pounder. Its caliber was 57 millimeter. It was designed back in 1938 to replace an earlier British gun, the 2-pounder, which had already proven too weak. But there was a problem. After the retreat from Dunkirk in 1940, Britain had lost most of its anti-tank guns in France. The factories were ordered to keep churning out the older 2-pounder, simply because the country was desperate for any gun at all. The better weapon was delayed by more than a year. It did not reach the desert until the spring of 1942. By early 1943, the 6-pounder sat in an awkward place. It was no longer new. It was not the most powerful gun in the theater. The much heavier 17-pounder was already being rushed to Tunisia to deal with the fearsome new German Tiger. So what could this modest gun actually do? It weighed a little over 1,100 kilograms, light enough to be towed by a jeep and manhandled into a hidden pit by its crew. That crew numbered 6 men. though a good team could work it with 4. It fired an armor-piercing shot at a muzzle velocity of around 850 meters per second. At a range of roughly 900 meters, that shot could bite through about 68 to 70 millimeters of armor. That was enough. Enough to kill a Panzer III, enough to kill a Panzer IV, enough to smash the side or the rear of a Tiger if you could get a shot at its flank. But there was the catch that haunted its crews. The 6-pounder could not defeat the thick frontal armor of a Tiger. If a Tiger came at you head-on, your shot would strike the glacis and skitter away like a stone off a frozen pond. To kill with this gun, you needed cunning, you needed cover, and above all, you needed nerve, because you had to let the tank come dangerously close before you fired. Which brings us back to Medenine, and to the trick the British were about to play. Montgomery had a priceless gift that morning. Codebreakers back in England had cracked Rommel's radio traffic. Montgomery knew the plan of attack. He knew roughly where it would fall and when. One account records that he was handed the details of the assault at 36 minutes past 5 in the morning. The German tanks rolled forward at 6, so Montgomery prepared a killing ground. He did not stack his tanks up front to trade blows. Instead, he built a wall of hidden guns. He moved entire divisions into the line. The 51st Highland Division, the 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats, the 2nd New Zealand Division. He covered the open southern flank with light armor and a column of Free French troops. Along that front, he placed around 460 anti-tank guns, most of them 6-pounders, and he gave the crews an order that went against every instinct a frightened man has under fire. Hold your fire. Let the tanks come. Do not shoot at long range. Wait until they are right on top of you. Then hit them all at once. The guns were dug in low and draped with netting. The men waited. Sergeant Andrews and his crew waited on their ridge. Not far away, another gun sergeant, a man named Crangles, waited in a dry riverbed called Wadi Halouf, and in the gray light before dawn, the German engines began to growl. One of the young officers on that line was Captain Stuart Playfoot of the 1st Battalion of the 7th Queen's Royal Regiment. His account survives, and it tells you exactly what kind of defense this was. It was improvised. It was thin. It was almost poor. His men had been ordered to hold ground in a saddle between 2 hills, covering a pair of wadis. They had no landmines, so they made their own fakes. They took empty tin cans, buried them in the dirt, and heaped little piles of sand on top to make each one look like a real mine waiting to explode. A minefield made of rubbish and bluff. That was what stood between Rommel's panzers and the British rear. Then, through the mist, Playfoot heard the sound he would never forget. The rumble of the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions, grinding down out of the hills along the Tujan Road, straight towards him. The attack opened under cover of fog at around 6 in the morning, and almost at once, the German plan began to unravel. The panzers came on, expecting to overrun a thin screen. They did not know they were driving into hundreds of concealed guns. At about 8:30, 10 Panzer IIIs pushed towards a hill the British called Point 270. 2 hidden 6-pounders of the 73rd Anti-Tank Regiment let them come close. Then they fired. 4 of the German tanks were knocked out at a range of just 400 yards. Maori infantry mortars finished a 5th. 15 German prisoners were taken, including the officer commanding that tank company. But the real slaughter was happening on the front held by the Queen's Brigade, the infantry of the 7th Armored Division. This was Sergeant Andrews' fight. The panzers pressed in, and the gun crews did the hardest thing soldiers can do. They stayed silent and let the tanks roll almost onto their positions. Then the whole line erupted at point-blank range. At 200 yards, at 100 yards, the 6-pounders slammed shot after shot into the flanks of the German armor. In Wadi Halouf, Sergeant Crangles fought one of the great gun actions of the Desert War. In roughly half an hour, his single 6-pounder knocked out around 14 German tanks. He fired at a little over 200 yards. His Bren gunner sprayed the tanks to force their commanders to duck down inside and lose their view. Crangles kept loading and firing until a German shell struck his gun square on the recuperator and wrecked it. Even then, he did not run. With his gun dead, he ordered his crew to fix bayonets. He grabbed the Bren gun himself and kept fighting until the position was overrun and he was taken prisoner. On Andrews' gun, the story was much the same. German fire blew apart the low wall of earth protecting his position. Andrews ordered his crew to take cover from the storm of shrapnel. Then he stayed at the gun alone. He loaded it himself. He aimed it himself. He fired it himself. One man serving a weapon built for 6, knocking out more tanks and blocking the mouth of the wadi with their burning hulls. By the reckoning of the regiment's own history, the guns of Sergeants Andrews and Crangles between them destroyed 22 panzers. The battalion war diary is more cautious and more precise. It counts 27 German tanks wrecked in front of the battalion, 12 of the upgunned Panzer IV, 12 of the upgunned Panzer III, 3 older Panzer IIIs. Whatever the exact figure, the regiment compared it to the legendary British stand at Outpost Snipe during El Alamein. It was, they said, a record for the 8th Army. Both sergeants were awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Montgomery sent the brigade a short message. "Well done, the Queens." Now, it would be easy to tell this story as if the German tanks were somehow inferior. They were not. And to understand why this defensive victory was so remarkable, you have to give Rommel's machines their due. The German panzers at Medenine were formidable. The Panzer IV Special carried a long, high-velocity 75mm gun that could outrange and outkill most Allied tanks of the period. The Panzer III Special was fast and reliable and battle-proven. These were the vehicles that had carved through Allied armies across 2 continents, and their crews were experienced professionals. More to the point, the German 6-pounder's equivalent, the towed anti-tank gun, was in many ways superior. The German 88mm gun was one of the most feared weapons of the entire war, able to kill at ranges the British could only dream of, man for man and gun for gun. The Germans often held the technical advantage. That is precisely what makes Medenine such an important lesson. The British did not win because their gun was better. Very often it was not. They won because of how the weapon was used. Surprise from the codebreakers. Ground chosen with care. Fire discipline held until the last possible second. A cheap, light, unglamorous gun placed in exactly the right spot and served by men who refused to run. The victory was not in the steel. It was in the plan and in the nerve. Rommel understood what had happened almost at once. There would be no breakthrough. His tanks were burning across the whole front, and they were dying, in his own army's assessment, almost entirely to anti-tank guns rather than to British tanks. Late in the afternoon, he ordered the Italian commander, General Messe, to end the battle. The attack was over before nightfall. The cost tells the whole story. The 3 panzer divisions lost 52 tanks. The British lost around 130 men. It was one of the most lopsided defensive actions of the North African campaign. For Rommel, it was the end. Medenine was the last battle he ever fought on African soil. 2 days later, on the 8th of March, he handed over command of Army Group Africa. On the 9th of March, he flew out of Tunisia for the last time. His departure was kept a close secret from the Allies, who did not know for weeks that the Desert Fox had gone. The man who had once seemed unbeatable left the continent beaten, his final offensive shattered by hidden guns he never saw until they fired. There is one more thread worth pulling, because it corrects a story you may have heard. Many people believe it was the Americans who first stopped Rommel's tanks in Tunisia. 2 weeks after Medenine, on the 23rd of March, 1943, American troops fought a hard and genuinely important battle at a place called El Guetar. The United States 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, broke a charge by the same 10th Panzer Division that had humiliated Green American troops a month earlier at Kasserine Pass. Around 30 German tanks were knocked out. It was the first time American forces defeated a veteran German Panzer Division, and it mattered enormously for their confidence. But here is the correction. Rommel was not there. He had already left Africa on the 9th of March, 2 weeks before El Guetar was fought, and the weapon that broke the 10th Panzer that day was not the little American anti-tank gun of the period, the 37mm, which had already been branded useless. After Kasserine, an American ordnance report bluntly demanded those guns be scrapped, saying their rounds bounced off German armor like peas. The real killers at El Guetar were self-propelled tank destroyers mounting a 75mm gun, along with artillery and a minefield. So the neat legend does not hold. The American 37mm gun was truly primitive, but it never made Rommel retreat. The gun that actually did it in person was British. It was the modest, half-retired 6-pounder, and it did its work at Medenine. So return now to that cold ridge in the fog on the 6th of March. Return to Sergeant Ivor Andrews, alone at his gun, loading and firing a weapon meant for 6 men, with tanks burning in the wadi in front of him. His gun survived the war. Today it stands as a trophy at a barracks in Canterbury, in England, a small 57mm anti-tank gun that the army of its own time had already begun to write off as yesterday's weapon. And yet, on one foggy morning in Tunisia, that outdated gun and the men who served it did what no wonder weapon and no famous general could do for the Allies before. They beat Erwin Rommel in a straight fight and sent him home for good. That is the lesson the 6-pounder leaves behind. A weapon does not need to be the newest or the biggest or the most feared thing on the battlefield. It only needs to be in the right place, in steady hands, at the moment that everything depends on it.